I'm from Autism Wessex. For those of you that don't know, we're a reasonable sized charity that operate in Dorset and then the outskirts or the borders of Somerset, Wiltshire and Hampshire. We were established in 1968 by a small group of parents who couldn't find the right education for their children, so they set up a shed in someone's back garden and started educating their children. And out of that was born Portfield School, which we have near Bournemouth Airport, which has 60 children with autism. And then we have a community support service, as well as 9 residential homes for adults. And the services that I'm involved in is our information and advice and our advocacy services. And those services are the things that are free at the point of delivery. So we fundraise for everything that I do. We have a free information and advice service. The bookmarks on your table have the contact details for that information and advice. Anybody at all, whether that be a parent who has a concern about their child, an adult with a condition, or again, questions about autism, or somebody working who might be working with clients with the condition or anything like that, or just have a personal interest. We advise on autism, we advise on behaviour difficulties and challenges, but we also advise on things like social and statutory support, developing skills with people, benefits, housing, education and employment. So in fact, it's sort of everything around autism, but not necessarily always the autism itself. What I'm going to do today is a very sort of really quick snapshot of, really, I suppose, autism and the common sort of thoughts around autism and also the challenges that people face. And I'm also going to show you a film that we've made in conjunction, it's a very short film, that we've made in conjunction with some adults with Asperger's recently about their experiences. Unfortunately, I was going to have a gentleman with me today presenting with autism, but he's unwell. So you've just got me, but he is in the film. So without further ado, I've just given you a handout with some sort of statements about autism on there. What I'd like to do is just start by perhaps somebody choosing a statement, and we'll go through some of the descriptions and what they mean. So can I pick on somebody? Let's have the nurse over here. So on that did you know page, would you just like to choose a statement on there?
Males are 5 times more likely than females to be diagnosed.
Okay, so males are 5 times more likely than females to be diagnosed with autism. There's no evidence at the moment to suggest that autism is really higher in males. You know, that's certainly something that hasn't necessarily been proved scientifically. What tends to happen is that women tend to, if you like, the condition manifests itself in different ways. So women will often have depression, they will often self-harm, they might control themselves by anorexia and eating disorders, so that the diagnosis, if you like, the behaviours that are often exhibited that we might attribute to autism aren't necessarily so obvious in females, and they might deal with their condition in a different way. So it doesn't mean to say they haven't got it, but it's just not necessarily as obvious in the younger years. The other thing is that girls often will mirror behaviour. Socially, they will watch other people and they may find it easier to mirror behaviour and social interaction. So at the moment there's no evidence, but certainly more males are diagnosed with the condition than females. Okay, let's do another one. What about you? Would you like to choose one?
More than 20 million people worldwide have autism.
Yeah, more than 20 million people worldwide have autism. So clearly, with the diagnosis since certainly since the late 70s, early 80s, we have a much greater understanding of the condition, and the diagnostic process was finally sort of formalised, if you like, and agreed. Certainly in this country, it wasn't until the 80s that we had a diagnostic process for people with Asperger's syndrome, and I'll talk about the difference of autism and Asperger's and what that diagnosis is in a minute. But certainly the rates of diagnosis, you're probably far more aware of autism now than maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Certainly my parents wouldn't have heard of autism, or it would have been something that wasn't really sort of discussed or talked about. And now clearly we have lots of children in mainstream schooling, we have adults that are working and things like that. It's not necessarily that the increase, the autism is increasing, but it might be just that we're better at diagnosing people from a younger age. I have to say, I think it's probably a bit of both. I don't think there's enough research into that at the moment, but I would suggest that actually our awareness is greater, we're diagnosing more people therefore, but equally I think there probably is an increase in autism itself. Should we have another one? What about somebody over the back? What about the naughty table at the back there? Lady in a very sparkly jumper.
In the UK, a child is diagnosed with autism every 21 minutes.
Yeah, so what I've just said about the rates of autism, obviously we're much more aware of it. In terms of the age of diagnosis, we find certainly in the Dorset area we have people, often you might have children, there's several peaks, so you'll have children at the age of around about 3 years old with a diagnosis. Clearly they might be from very soon after they're born, there might be issues that are warranting a referral to a paediatrician, and they would be highlighted. The diagnostic process involves a paediatrician, usually a speech and language therapist, often an OT, and if the child's at school, usually an educational psychologist. And what happens is you tend to get some children at that early diagnosis. You also have another peak at around about 6 or 7 if you start to think of when children go to school, start to engage with other people. The teachers often might observe behaviours or difficulties that are then attributed to a child's autism. And then we have another peak at around about 13, 14, 15 years old, and that's usually, if you think about being a 13, 14, 15-year-old, it's probably the hardest time of most people's lives in a sense. The development going on not just in our bodies but in our social understanding is huge, and certainly the difficulties that some people with autism have around social communication and interaction is clearly more evident in those teenage years, so there's another peak. What you'll find is that lots of the parents of children that get a diagnosis a little bit later will say, but we always knew there was something different, or that John struggled in those areas, but there maybe wasn't enough evidence for a diagnosis. Also as well, some people weigh up, you have to think about, do I want a diagnosis to my child? How is that going to benefit? What are the pros and cons of a diagnosis as well? We can maybe discuss that at some point. What about the research ladies I've been talking to? Would you like to read one out?
Autism is a hidden disability. You can't always tell if someone has it.
Yeah, it is a hidden disability often. If I just explain the differences between autism and Asperger's, the diagnosis for the two is similar, but a person would have in the past usually got a diagnosis of autism if they were non-verbal up until about the age of 7 or 8. So if they didn't have speech or communication through speech, then they would have had a diagnosis of autism. If they did have speech, and by and large that speech was developing normally, that doesn't mean to say the comprehension was necessarily developing at the same rate, but if somebody did have speech and verbal communication, then they would have usually or often had a diagnosis of either Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism. Just to confuse the issue totally, in about the last 18 months, the American diagnostic system decided they were going to get rid of the two labels, if you like, and anybody that meets the criteria will now have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. And what happens is the report will detail the obvious, differences or the difficulties that that particular person has. What's happened in the UK is that unfortunately the NHS don't seem to have had an agreement on how they're going to diagnose people. So there are some NHS services that use the American model and only diagnose autism spectrum disorder, and there are some that carry on with the difference in autism and Asperger's syndrome. So the most important thing I would say is if somebody discloses their disability as autism or Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism, the main thing is to ask them exactly how it affects them and try and understand how their autism impacts on their life, because it's very difficult to make a judgment just on that diagnosis, isn't it? Okay, so we have another one. What about on here, on this table?
Autism can be a serious and disabling condition.
Yeah.
People need lifelong support.
Yeah, so it can be a serious and disabling condition. Some people with autism need lifelong support. Some people don't need any support at all. So it's a huge spectrum of differences. So we, in our community care service, which is primarily funded by local authority or healthcare, they might assess somebody with autism. They might say, actually, this person doesn't need any support at all. They don't meet our criteria, and therefore they don't qualify for support. That doesn't mean to say that person doesn't need some help, but what they won't do is qualify for statutory support. You might find that there are people, we certainly support people that need 24-hour care, and that will usually be somebody who has a diagnosis of autism, but then will probably be non-verbal. They might have other conditions as well, so that might be something like mental ill health, or it might be learning difficulties or disabilities as well, so there might be a range of care needs. There also might be personal care involved there as well. But as I say, that it's huge. What we do find is that some people who don't necessarily qualify for statutory support will often use some of their benefit money or their income to pay for some support. So they might decide that actually what's really good for them is to have just 1 or 2 hours a week or a month where they can get to sit down with somebody, work through. It might be just going through their posts, checking their bills are paid. It might actually be talking through their thoughts and feelings and getting things in order for the coming week or the coming month. It might be about going shopping if that's something that's difficult, but they might find their own support as well. But it is a lifelong condition that may need support. One of the other statements on here is talking about the fact that you know, it does span a life, but that doesn't mean to say that people can't learn and improve their independent skills. So a lot of the work that we encourage people, obviously if you get an early diagnosis, more work you can do with a young person to help them develop their social skills, their interaction, their life skills and things like that. We've just, there's been a lady recently who we've been supporting. She's lived in residential care probably for about 25 years. She's now 50, but she developed the skills that she can now, she's moved out, she's moved into, actually she must be 55 because she's moved into one of the sort of platinum, what they call retirement sort of complexes. But for her, that's independent living. That's a vast difference from where she was 10, 15 years ago. And she's now able to live independently in her flat with much less support. And what we're finding actually is that she's a great support to some of the other people that live in those, in her block of flats, if you like, because she's able to support them as well. So for her, it's been a massive change, a massive increase in her own independence. So it's important to remember that it doesn't sort of stop, you know, when somebody gets to adulthood. Okay, let's have another one. The lady here in the flat, would you like to?
Yeah, bullying at school affects more than 40% of children.
Yeah, bullying at school affects more than 40% of children with autism. I have to say, I'm not sure what the statistics are like for other children, to be quite honest. I think bullying is possibly more prevalent, but we're certainly more aware of it, you know, and every school has their bullying policies and things like that. However, what's important is obviously that those children with autism do get the right support at school, the right education. We work with a lot of mainstream schools now to try and educate or support their teachers and their TAs to understand the condition. What sometimes happens is you'll find that schools will say, the parents will say, do you know what, when my child comes home, they're exhibiting all sorts of challenging behaviour, they're, you know, kicking chairs over, they're hitting their baby sisters, they're, you know, doing all of these things. And I go to school and I say, what's going on? And the school say, he's lovely at school. He's really, you know, he's perfect. And actually what tends to happen is with some of the processing difficulties and the challenges with interaction and understanding, a child with autism will by and large often try and control their behaviour whilst they're at school, and then when they get home they're in a very safe environment, they're with people they trust, and boy does the lid come off. and the behaviour can be really challenging. So what we try and help schools understand is that even though that child may on the surface be coping, there are things that they can help that child with to reduce their anxiety, so that perhaps when they get home they're not quite, their scale isn't at red, maybe they're at amber or green, and there are things they can do to reduce their stress levels and their anxiety and their understanding and comprehension. So that's really important. One of the things I just want to explain now really is about the 4 sort of areas of autism, if you're not aware of them. So in the diagnostic process, they will be looking at sensory processing, communication, interaction, and flexible thinking and imagination. So one of the things that can be incredibly difficult for somebody with autism is, if you like, theory of mind, where being able to predict things that will happen, understanding what consequences might be, and therefore being able to make choices. So, for example, when I came here today, I've never been to this room before. I've met a few of you, I think, in the past, but by and large, I'm asked to do a talk, so I expect there's going to be a room, there's going to be chairs, there's going to be tables, there's going to be people listening to me, there's going to be hopefully some toilets, there's going to be a place where I can get a drink. I know by and large what to expect. If I have autism, what I might not do is have that theory of mind, that understanding. So for me, every situation can be a whole journey of unpredictability. I don't know when I come in here if you ladies are going to stand up on the table and start singing songs from Mamma Mia. I don't know if I'm going to be expected to speak. I don't know if I'm going to be expected to take off my clothes, put on my clothes, wear an outfit. I don't know if it's going to be noisy. I don't know if it's going to be quiet. I can't predict it because I haven't really experienced it. I haven't learned that. So where I have my imagination and I can imagine what something might be like, if I don't have that as a natural skill, that can be incredibly frightening. Which is why often so many people say, when my child, when we talk about change, or we're talking about doing something different, or we're going out for the day, we're going on a school trip, if I don't know what to expect, if I can't imagine, it's obvious, I'm going to get on a bus, I'm going to be in a coach sitting next to Johnny, who I normally sit next to, and Mrs. Jones is going to be there, and we're going to do this, and I'm going to be safe, and I'm going to get some lunch. If I don't know that, if I can't predict it, then my anxiety levels are really going to be quite high, aren't they? So it's important that with those sorts of things, it's really important to remember that if you're working with people with autism, that there is some understanding about being able to explain what might happen, what the situation might be. If I can't predict those things, I can't imagine some of the scenarios. So if you think about making choices, if somebody gives me a choice of just 2 things, like it's really warm today, actually it's supposed to be winter, but on a freezing cold day, if I'm offered a hot chocolate or an ice cold lemonade, I can imagine how the hot chocolate's going to make me feel. I'm going to see what's going to make me feel better. I know what that's going to do. Whereas if I haven't got that choice-making process, if I can't predict, if I can't imagine what the consequence of something might be, I might make the wrong choices. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day if I choose an ice-cold lemonade. It's not going to, change the world. However, making choices, those bigger choices, you think of an adolescent making choices about their GCSEs, about their career choices, that lovely meeting you have with your careers advisor when they say, what do you want to be? I mean, I don't know now, but when you're 15 or 16 and you're being asked to make those choices, if you don't have that theory of mind to understand what the implications, what the impact of those choices might be, if you can't imagine what some types of work situations might be like, what might be expected of you, that might need to be explained in far more detail, giving people the experiences. One of the other things I should say about that flexible thinking and imagination is generalised learning can be very difficult. So, for example, if you're teaching somebody, say for example a new computer package is sent off to a classroom where all the kids or the students are sitting in one classroom learning at the computer, their learning will often take more information around this about their surroundings. So for example, when I learn to do that particular task on the computer, if I'm in this room, part of my learning, my brain is telling me that in order to complete that task, there's a brown door there, there's a blue sign, a green sign, a red sign, there's a PowerPoint projector. The setting becomes part of my learning experience. So when I go and transfer that learning to at home or to another classroom or another setting, another workplace, it might not automatically register that this is the skill that I need, because actually I haven't got all the tools. The whole manual isn't there because there isn't a brown door and there isn't some blue signs and a red sign and 2 PowerPoint projectors. So you have to help people often to recognise what's important, what's the information they need to focus on before they can take that learning to another place. Certainly we find in our school when we're teaching cookery, for example, well, if we teach somebody to make a cheese sandwich in a setting, we get them making that sandwich over and over, and then, you know, doing that in different places, looking at aids to help them remember that. It's all very well when it's a cheese sandwich, because actually, you know, those steps can be quite simple. You can write them down, it'd be quite easy. Where you're having to incorporate decision making into that learning process, that can be really quite difficult. So it's important to remember, you know, that if you think learning has taken place, you might need to actually take that learning again and remind people. Certainly in the workplace, what I'm often saying to people is, you know, people get sent, if you work for Barclays Bank, you'll get sent on a course. Well, it's important to remember that, you know, if somebody's done really well on that course, that learning might need to be reinforced or relearned in a new setting. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. So let's just have a quick look then at, just look at my time. If you go onto the back of the page, how you can help. Can I have another statement? Let's have the gentleman with the tank top there.
Interesting this one. Some people with autism are sensitive to light, movement, sounds, smell and touch. Try to keep the environment as calm as possible to alleviate anxiety.
Yes. I'll go on to the second statement in a minute. The first one, so some people with autism are sensitive to light, movement, sound, smell and touch. What you'll find in the diagnostic process now, sensory processing is included as part of the diagnosis of autism. They can be sensitive, but what you'll find is that some people with autism can be hypersensitive, so extremely perceptive to noise, sight, sound, smell, touch, things like that. So for example, it's not about the loud noises. As I walked from the car park today, there's a guy drilling away and all of that. It's not pleasant for most of us. But if you're hypersensitive, there's a fan from the projector going on here. We've got quite a lot of lights in this room, but the fan might for some people be like a drill going on. So it will be amplified, if you like. So often when we talk about people being noise sensitive, it's not the really loud noises, but it might be the quieter noises that impact on their daily life. So if you think about being in this room, if that is sounding like a bit like a drill going off, the person with autism might not be able to focus on what's being said or might need time to process their surroundings for that. If you're, for example, very sensitive to touch, if you're hypersensitive, if somebody, you know, is brushing past you or stroking your arm or something like that, you know, sometimes we give people a light hug, don't we? Actually, if you're very sensitive, that could be really quite painful. And that's why sometimes you'll have people with autism that shy away from that sort of thing, because that type of touch is felt to be sort of more severe, if you like, and more sensitive. What you might find though is those people will find deep pressure touch quite comforting often, because it's a different process. Taste, for example, you might have somebody very sensitive to taste, so they might avoid things like, you know, hot foods. They might eat very bland foods, so that there isn't much flavour, and we'll think, oh, you know, there's nothing to that. If you take sort of plain pasta or something, you know, and think, well, what is that? But actually, if I'm very sensitive, anything doesn't have to be a strong taste, but anything might be really quite uncomfortable. Smell, for example, as well. If I'm hypersensitive to smell, I'm guessing that most people here today probably had a shower or something before they came today. They probably put on some deodorant. They probably put on some perfume or aftershave or something like that. You've all probably got clothes that have been washed recently, so you've got fabric conditioner and things like that. I can't actually smell any of that, but I know, you know, pretty much it's there. But if I'm hypersensitive, it might be very difficult for me to process my surroundings if the cloying smell of a perfume or a deodorant or something is also affecting my senses. So if I've got the noise going on and I've got that smell that I'm finding hard to process, then I'm still not focusing on the person doing the talk. So again, it's about having time to process surroundings and also do some sensory processing, which I'll talk about. I should just say there are people that are also under-responsive, so they might seek out louder noises, they might seek out bright lights. And some of the adults that come to our drop-in centre, they really like the projectors that do the very bright colours, and they will stare quite intently at them because they seek out that, so they're under-responsive. And if you think about sort of where somebody might learn or receive information, there's a sort of a span like that, and if I'm over-responsive and I'm finding it very difficult, or I'm under-responsive, therefore I'm quite lethargic and not engaging, I need to bring myself back into that zone, and there are all sorts of ways that people can do that. You also, with sensory processing, it's not just about sensitivities, but it might also be about the way people process information. So, for example, you might have some people who will look at, we have mono-processing, so they might only process one sense at a time. So if I can't deal with, if I need to focus on my audio, my listening skills, I might not be able to use my visual skills as well. So we might find that somebody with autism will be looking at the floor or focusing intently on a pen or something like that. And we often hear from teachers, Johnny, look at me when I'm talking, or, you're not listening to me. But actually, 9 times out of 10, if you ask that child, what is it I've just been talking about for the last 5 minutes, they embarrass you by telling you exactly what you've been talking about for the last 5 minutes. So it's important to remember that actually sometimes people who aren't making eye contact, one of the reasons might be it's not they're being rude, but it's about processing information. And if it's difficult to process information because you have those sensitivities, or one sense is processing over the others, it's far more important for somebody to listen, isn't it, than you making eye contact. I've just been doing some work with Dorset Police and obviously explaining to them, or working with some young people with them about, is it important to make eye contact with somebody, or is it more important to get the facts from a suspect or a victim of a crime? I have to say they've been, the police have been absolutely brilliant in responding to that and doing some work around that, so it's really good. Okay, let's have another one. Who haven't I picked on? You're doing a presentation this afternoon, aren't you? Yes. Yeah. Do you want some practice in speaking?
Social difficulties may include a lack of eye contact and unusual body language.
Yeah, what is it about eye contact? There's this whole thing that I've just sort of been talking about regarding eye contact. One of the things that covers a whole area of autism that I think really sums up a lot of the social challenges that people face. If you think of all of the skills that we learn as a child or an adolescent that we don't actually get taught. So, for example, eye contact, listening to the tone of somebody's voice, non-verbal communication, body language, initiating conversation, appropriate behaviour, personal space, and things like that. Nobody really teaches us those things. I don't remember my mum teaching me how to make appropriate eye contact, but I do remember when my mum gave me that look that I stopped whatever it was that I was doing. Nobody teaches you that, but you just know, don't you? And certainly I think with people with autism, those things, if there's a manual, and there are lots of books about it, but if there was a manual for those sorts of things, that would be the type of things that people would need to be taught. So, for example, with tone of voice, I'm going to say a sentence now in several different ways. So if I say, I didn't say you stole my money. 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 Right, okay, so 7 ways of saying the same thing. If I don't understand or pick up the different tones of somebody's voice and the meaning that that has attached to it, I can misunderstand information all the time. And often what people say to me, certainly the adults that come to our drop-ins, they'll often say, you know, I don't know when somebody, if they're getting angry, or actually if they said something else, or have I misunderstood, and I get myself into trouble because I think they're being rude, and then I get angry with them, or vice versa. What you'll also find is on the opposite side of that, a lot of people with autism will often speak in sort of a fairly monotone voice, and it might be on one level and there might not be much inflection in their voice, therefore we can't always read somebody's emotion in their voice. And it might be that they're getting angry but they're not displaying it, or vice versa. So it's really difficult. That whole thing about non-verbal communication is huge. And facial expressions, we talk about trying to teach children facial expressions, or teach adults, and that's really hard, because if you go on the internet, there's loads of stuff, there's loads of pictures about facial expressions, and there'll be a person that's excited or happy or sad. Well, everybody in this room is by and large displaying the same facial expression. But I have no idea whether you're depressed, whether you're excited, whether you're happy, whether you're sad, whether you're bored to tears. You know, I can't tell that just by your facial expression. And we expect an awful lot when we talk to people about autism, saying, oh, what you need to do is read facial expression. Because you might be going to, I don't know, a Take That concert tonight, and you might be absolutely busting with excitement. But you're not going to display that here, are you? That's an internal feeling. In the same way as you might be sad, you might have had a row with your husband this morning, there might be something wrong. But I can't tell that by looking. And we expect often employers sort of saying, oh, you know, they don't recognise people's feelings, what they need is more of this. Well, actually, it's really difficult. It's a really difficult skill. And what we tend to do is pick up on lots of other things. So we might pick up on somebody's behaviour, their tone of voice, their manner. And if we don't have that skill or find that difficult, it's hard. I'm just going to do a quick, can I borrow you? Quick exercise. Just mind this thing there. If you'd like to stand over there, just by that banner. One of the other things, we talk about non-verbal communication. I don't know about you, but I have a sort of personal space. I don't know if anybody's seen Dirty Dancing. They do that personal space bit in there, don't they? But I have a bubble, if you like, where I know where I feel comfortable, and I know when somebody's invading, if you like, my personal space. Somebody with autism might not have that naturally. Again, it's another skill that we're not taught, it's just something that happens. So, I haven't met this lady before. What I want you to do is just take a step towards me. Do you feel comfortable?
Yeah.
Yeah. Take another step. Feel comfortable?
Sort of.
Yeah. Take another step. How do you feel now? Mm-hmm. Good? Yeah? Okay. Right. So we have a natural personal space. What you might find is somebody with autism, A, might not have that personal space, so they're coming up very close, and that's really, really awkward. Not only is it awkward, it can feel quite challenging as well. You know, there might be somebody who's, you know, strapping lad or whatever comes up, and it can get people, you know, very worried, very anxious. What you want to do is what you did, is lean back or step away. Yeah. You can sit down, it's all right. The other side of that is that that can work in reverse. So there are some people whose personal space is much bigger. What can be difficult is I work with a gentleman who his personal space is about 1.5 meters. So every time I take a step towards him, he's taking a step back because it feels like somebody's in his face. And he said to me, his difficulty is, if you can imagine just walking along Bournemouth High Street, if your personal bubble is that big, it feels like everybody is invading your personal space, and his levels of anxiety, you know, are through the roof. And he said, I have to regulate where I go, how I navigate the street, and also, you know, times that I have to take myself out of those situations because I find them too difficult. And I still do it. I still try and walk towards him, and then I think, right now, if I just stay here, we can have a really good conversation. but it can be really difficult. And again, it's a taught skill. So what we can do with people with autism is we'll often talk about trying to help them understand more about facial expression as well as body language, etc. Eye contact is one of those things where somebody said, lady with autism decided that she was going to devise a formula for eye contact. So she said to her psychologist, said, I've come up with this mathematical formula. I want you to watch me with my friend over a coffee and see if you think I've got it right. She had the coffee, psychologist said, brilliant, you know, you were making absolutely appropriate eye contact, it was all fine. How was coffee with your friends, blah, 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 how did it go? She couldn't remember really anything of the conversation because all she was doing is she was sitting there, she's saying to the person, she's having a chat and then she's thinking, right, look at their eyebrow for 1.3 seconds, look at their mouth for 2.3 seconds, stare them in the eye for 3 seconds, look at their hair, look away. So she had this brilliant formula, but actually it's no use man or beast. If you can't know what somebody's saying or engage in conversation and social interaction, then what's the point? So it was more about helping her understand that maybe that's not the biggest deal, maybe it's about developing the skills that you need socially to make those links. The other thing around, I think, just under that, so it was lack of eye contact and unusual body language, also talking at inappropriate moments about inappropriate topics. Again, you know, we might have some pointers as a child, but we're not always taught about what is an appropriate conversation. We just get it, don't we? And often people with autism will find it really difficult to understand what's an appropriate topic. So you might have people that will talk immediately about their, their obsession with trains, for example, and not think about asking you about, you know, how was the funeral of your mother last week, because they can't regulate that conversation without having some direction. And we do teach people a lot about what's appropriate, but also how to initiate conversations, because if that's really difficult, they'll either again feel that embarrassed because they might not know what to say, they might not feel that they've said the appropriate thing. So we use various sort of things. At the drop-in group, we did an exercise recently with some adults, and we said, you know, there's an acronym called WORM, and if you want to start a conversation, W is for the weather, because we love talking about the weather for some reason. O is for occupation, so you can talk about somebody's jobs. R is for recreation, so you can talk about their hobbies and their interests. And M is for media, so what's going on in the news. And we got them to sort of learn that, if you like, and then within the drop-in group, there are a lot of people that actually don't talk to each other, and we got them all trying to talk to each other and initiate conversations, and they said it really helped. They said it doesn't necessarily help in the sense that some of those subjects they might not be interested in, so for example, the weather. But equally, they said it was a really useful way because there are those awkward moments when you can't think what to say. I'm scared about saying the wrong thing because I've done that before and people have got annoyed or they walk off or I don't understand what I've said, whereas that gave them quite a good in. And let's face it, most of the conversations we have, I would say, are small talk, really. You know, it's very rare, unless maybe we're with a couple of close friends, most of the conversations we hold might be with colleagues or, you know, people on the bus or people that were sitting down maybe for a coffee in the coffee break. It's just small talk, isn't it? How was your holiday? What was the weather like? You know, wasn't it terrible in the news last week? Or did you read that article? Or, you know, how was your snowboarding or whatever? All of those things are natural small talk to us, but again, somebody might need that. And also it's then about thinking, you know, if somebody has got autism and, you know, indulging them sometimes in their interest. Okay, next one, let's have another one. Who have we got? Lady in the mustard top there. Everyone's looking away. I hate that bit. Who's going to be kicked on next?
Maintain a routine, familiarity is often important.
Yes, maintain a routine, familiarity is often important. It is important for people with autism to have a routine. Some of the hardest times are the unstructured times. So if you think about behaviour at school, sometimes people can manage because it's quite a structured situation. You know, you've got your timetable, you know where you're going, you know what's going to happen. This time of year, in the build-up to Christmas in particular, things go a bit awry, don't they? Schools change the timetable, there's parties, there's Christmas plays going on, there's different classes, you know, and often kids will come home and go, we were supposed to have double maths and we watched a video of Frozen, you know, and it's like, whoa, where did that come from? But it's the change in routine that can be very difficult. And again, if you go back to things like imagination and consequences and things like that, it can be very difficult. So maintaining a routine is important. What we try and do as well is, because maintaining a routine is all great, but you know, life isn't perfect. So it's trying to help people also manage the times when things don't go according to plan. And by being able to do that by using things like visual cues or what we call social stories, or written information about this, you know, this part of the year is going to be different, but almost then having a schedule and saying, you know, instead of this, this might happen, or there will be a change, and giving people opportunities to opt out sometimes. So Christmas parties, you know, again at school or at work, giving people the chance to either go for a shorter period of time. It might be about their sensitivities to all the lights, the noise, etc., the smells. It could be about the food that's being expected to be eaten. It could be about the small talk and all the conversations that we're having. Some people might enjoy some of that, but equally it might be quite an anxious time. I know sometimes at work there's a tendency to, you know, there's always maybe a couple of people, well, they never come to the Christmas party, they never come to the pub, they're a boring old sod. Actually, that might not be the case at all. They might just find those situations harder. They might be very anxious. If they're having to manage during the day with all of these things going on, actually going to the pub in the evening might just be something that's too hard to do. That doesn't mean to say that that person doesn't want to come or, you know, wouldn't enjoy other interaction with people. So it's just something to bear in mind, isn't it? I know when I was younger, I probably made assumptions about some of those things. The other thing I would say just about that social sort of side of things is quite often at work now, probably more so than at school, but you know, at work we're often being asked to do charitable events and things like that. So we might say, you know, come on, we're all going off to, you know, clean the heathland, or we have volunteers from Nationwide Building Society or Barclays Bank who come in and paint a classroom for us or something like that. What you might find is that somebody with autism, you know, if that's an employee, they might want to do those things, but they might not understand what's expected. Because again, if you think of that theory of mine, I can't predict, I can't imagine what's going to be expected or what's going to happen. So it might be more about just explaining to somebody what they might need to wear, what's going to happen when they get there, what would be expected of them. You know, are they going to be expected to paint? Are they going to be expected to, you know, man a stall or drive or do whatever? So explaining things in a lot more detail rather than making assumptions about, you know, the fact that, well, of course, you know, why wouldn't you know what's going to happen if you were going to do that? So, and then giving somebody the chance to opt out as well. And again, perhaps not saying, you know, making a judgment about why that person can't do something. Okay. I think what I'll do now, I'm just going to show you a quick, very, very quick short film. It involves, I think, 6 or 7 people with autism. And they just made a very quick film about their experiences. And it's really focused on work that we've been doing with shops and services and things like that. The first bit is actually the film. It's very, very short, but the behind the scenes bit, I think, is the interesting bit where they talk about how they are.
Hi, my name is Joseph Philip Weston, otherwise known as Joe. I contributed to the ideas process by going to the initial meeting with the film crew and the director, and I was able to share with them my own problems and experiences.
My name is Daniel Palmer. Everyone in my family knows me as DJ. I personally would describe the process as quite exciting. A bit nervous at times, I was, but in this case it's the first time I've done something like this.
My name is Oliver Gray, although other people call me Ollie because that's what my friends prefer to call me. It was nice to be part of the film, you know, to be recognised as a celebrity in a sort of way, and to give my points across and to show my emotional side as well as my good side.
My name's Andrew Pike. We had to do talking about all this, how it affects people got AS or autism.
I would describe the process of making the film as very enjoyable. I really was very interested to see all the aspects of the process. Really enjoyed being part of it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Personally, I would describe the style of the video as relaxed but informative.
I think the style of the finished film is spot on because it shows everyone's personality, like Joe's and myself and Andy Pike and Dan. Shows the different emotions we can portray when we face these crises in day-to-day life. What we feel internally can determine what our face shows, and that's really important for the film, that the level of the film made and what Autism Wessex decided on.
Okay, so all of those adults have a diagnosis of autism or Asperger's, and it was just really, I think actually what helped them was just the process of being involved with other people, being able to talk about their condition. But what you'll find is obviously one of the things mentioned on here is that autism is a hidden disability, and certainly if you met Joe or anybody else walking along the street, you wouldn't probably know that they had the condition. Interestingly enough there, I was listening to their voices, and when we talked about the monotone voice, actually, I think one of the chaps was talking about how excited he was and things like that, and it doesn't come across necessarily, so it's not making those assumptions. I just wanted to go back to something that I think in the statement the gentleman here read out, where it was the sensitive to light, movement, sound, smell and touch, and then try to keep the environment as calm as possible to really alleviate anxiety. What's really difficult is that you can't always do that. You know, schools will say to us, we can't take the smells out of the school, we can't take all of the pictures off the wall, we can't make it this beautiful, quiet place, and for everybody that won't be the best environment. So what we would often say is, rather than keeping the environment as calm as possible, let's be realistic, that's not always possible, but it's allowing somebody time to process their surroundings. So if they're coming into a classroom or they're going into a different area of the building, if you think about the way that people process, I think I said to you, sometimes with learning, the brain can't differentiate, it can't choose what's important. So often a person coming into a room might have to process all of the surroundings and everything going on before they can focus on what's important. So if you imagine a train track and all of the information coming through those carriages, but there's only one train track, so you can't divert those trains. So for example, I come into the room, what I might need to do is process the fact that there is a buzzing and there's, 15 lights, and there's a red sign and there's a blue sign and there's a purple sign and there's 2 banners, and there's lots of plug points over there, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 sockets, and there's, oh gosh, there's hundreds of them all the way along, and there's a coffee cup there, and there's a little bit of writing on that man's t-shirt, and I can't see what it is, but I'm going to get closer, and blah, blah, blah. Can you imagine all of a sudden I'm doing all of this, and actually the woman at the front's been giving the lecture, or the teacher's giving the homework, or whatever, something important is being talked about, and I've missed half of that. And often, certainly children will say, they'll come home, they don't understand what their homework is, they don't always get the full message, of what's expected of them. So in terms of making it, yes, it's good if the environment can be calm, and there are autism-friendly cinema screenings where they do turn down the volume, they do reduce the lights, they do let people move around, there are other things, people there to help, but equally you can't change the world to fit a particular group of people because we're all so different. But it might be about remembering to let somebody just process their surroundings before you start. give somebody time, especially if you're conducting an appointment where you want information from somebody, give them a little bit more time. And in order to do that, rather than sitting in silence, you know, you might want to sit somebody down and then sort of say, I'll nip off and get some water, or I've just got to finish this bit of paper, and then let that person process what's going on around them, process the sounds, the sight, the smell, the visuals, as well as the information that's coming down there. So the other thing I would say is also check somebody's understanding. So it's very easy for us to say, do you understand? You all got that? And everyone goes, yeah. And then you go out and go, I didn't really understand what they were saying. But it's really important, because what might happen is obviously that person with autism, when I talk about all of those things about tone of voice, processing time, etc., if they've missed the message or the emphasis on a particular area, then they might be interpreting instructions or demands in a different way. So rather than do you understand, it might be, what are you going to do next to make that happen? Or how do you think you're going to start that project or that piece of work? And it might give you an indication of the sort of direction they're going in and whether they've actually understood the brief. So it might be about, we've got OTs and nurses here, it might be about things that you want somebody to do at home in terms of you know, exercise or something like that, or practicing with certain sensory things. So it might be about getting them to understand, you know, how are you going to use that? What are you going to do with that when you get home? Do you remember what I said about this? How are you going to use it? Or can you show me what you're going to do now? Can you demonstrate to me what you're going to do? Has anybody got any questions? Silence. Okay, well, it is 11 o'clock, so I guess I've got to finish now, haven't I? I hope everyone's found that useful. Can I just say there are some bookmarks on the table if you need information. There are some leaflets on this table about us. There's also something called the Alert Card, which has been launched for Dorset, Bournemouth and Poole. Anybody over the age of 10 with a diagnosis of autism, high functioning autism or Asperger's can have an alert card. It just has emergency contact details on and a bit of information that they can hand to somebody to explain their autism, especially if they're experiencing anxiety or they might have been in an accident or they're lost or something like that. So they're really useful and they are free. So if you want any information on those, I've got a few leaflets on that, but it's on our website as well. So that's it. Thank you very much.